What's going on, guys? I'm Dr. Jim Cellini. I'm a board-certified veterinary neurologist. On today's episode, I wanted to take a moment to walk you guys through some of the most common myths that I've ever encountered as it pertains to veterinary medicine. These are things I get asked all the time by my non-veterinarian friends and family. They range from pretty naive and innocent to downright triggering in some cases, like you'll see. So I'm going to walk you through the whole range here. You'll get to see everything. But before I get started, if you don't mind hitting the like and subscribe button, that really helps with the algorithm and helps my channel, helps me grow and basically spread all this information to people, which is my goal. So all right, let's get started. All right, so myth number one, getting into veterinary school is harder than getting into medical school. This is a myth I hear all the time, and it's sort of true, but not really, so let me walk you through it. I think people think this is true because there's only about 30 veterinary schools in the country, whereas there's about 180 medical schools in the country. So most people just think, well, there's 30 versus 180, so it's easier to get into more schools. But I think you have to dig a little bit deeper into the numbers. In 2020, there were a grand total of about 10,000 applicants to veterinary schools across the US. And of those 10,000, about 10 to 15% ended up getting accepted, depending on what school you look at. In the same time frame, approximately about 53,000 people applied for medical schools across the US, and the medical schools on average had an applicant acceptance rate of about 46%. So for future veterinarians, you're facing a lower amount of seats, lower number of schools to apply to, but you're also facing a lower number of applicants to compete against. And the opposite is true for medical school. You're facing a lot more applicants, but you're also having more opportunities to get accepted. And I'm sure there's a statistical test somewhere that can allow proper comparison of percentages based on population size. I think it's an odd ratio. I'm by no means a statistician. If anybody knows, please feel free to comment below and correct me. But overall, yeah, I probably would still lean towards veterinary school being a little bit more difficult to get into. I think if I had to guess, the numbers would still point to that sort of 10% or so acceptance rate. That's pretty low. So I think even though the number of applicants is lower than medical school, I don't think that necessarily makes up for the much lower acceptance rate. So I'm gonna say that's a myth, but it's still kind of true. All right, myth number two, veterinarians make a lot of money, or veterinarians are only in it for the money. Veterinarians are money hungry. Veterinarians, money, money, money. Okay, you get the idea. This myth is absolutely true. See, the reason this is true is because Big Dog Food has contracted you at a very early stage in your career, and a shadow organization run by Hills and Royal Canin will find you before school starts, and they will get you to sign a contract where you have to push their brand of food no matter what, and they will pay you about $100,000 for every bag of food that you sell to an unsuspecting owner. Obviously, this is not true at all. This isn't even remotely true, but for some reason, people think that Big Dog Food somehow buys off veterinarians and they pay us off, which is hilarious. Anyways, in regards to vets being money hungry, here are some actual facts. According to NerdWallet, the average veterinary student loan coming out of school is about $183,000. Meanwhile, the average starting salary for a veterinarian is somewhere between $24,000 to about $100,000 a year, depending on if you're doing an internship or going straight into private practice. So I don't know about you, but I don't know many rich people who are taking out $183,000 worth of loans at an interest rate and then using that to then make $24,000 to $100,000 a year. And bear in mind, if you're going the specialist route like I did, and I explained this in a previous video, you've got about 3 to 4 years where you're gonna make somewhere in the neighborhood of like $24,000 to $40,000 a year. Meanwhile, barely paying your student loans and watching your student loans just sit there compounding with interest rates. Now again, I'm no expert, but this does not seem like a formula to get rich. In fact, I know some very wealthy people, and none of them even considered being a veterinarian in their entire life. They went investment banking routes and accounting, stuff like that. One even happens to be an interventional radiologist. But in all seriousness, vets are not in it for the money. I've never met a veterinarian who's even remotely just in it for the money. Every veterinarian I have ever met, and I'm seriously talking about every single one, literally just wants to do what's best for the animals at all times. That's what we all want. We just want animals to suffer less. That's it. And that's what we're trying to do. All right, myth number 3, and that is veterinarians are not real doctors. I guess this kind of depends on your definition of a doctor, which has been kind of controversial as of late.
The piece calls on her to stop using the title doctor because...
But just to review, in order to be a veterinarian, you have to go through veterinary school, which is a 4-year veterinary medical training program. And in a lot of ways, it is very similar to medical school. Now, I know this because my 2 younger brothers happen to be doctors. And overall, the things we study and how we study them, the different organ systems and whatnot, are very similar between animals like dogs and cats and various mammals to people. But there are obviously some key differences between veterinarians and physicians. For instance, we veterinarians don't necessarily have to go to any sort of post-school or postgraduate training in order to practice. With physicians, you almost always have to go to some sort of postgraduate training. And they oftentimes do that even if they want to do like family practice. Whereas in veterinary medicine, you can literally go straight into practice right after school. There's no postgraduate training necessarily. The upside to it is that you can just start your career earlier and start earning for your family, start paying down your student loans earlier, and just basically get on with your life at the end of school. But the downside is simply the learning curve of learning how to be a vet. It takes a lot when you're starting out, and it can be very overwhelming. So if you go straight out of school and into practice, you're oftentimes thrown to the wolves. And unless you have a good mentorship program, whether it be an internship or just a really good practice where the other colleagues of yours are willing to kind of be patient with you and walk you through stuff and like train you up a little bit, that learning curve can be really difficult. In human medicine, from what I can tell, physicians tend to spend years training to specialize in one specific tiny niche of medicine after medical school. And I think medicine on people almost has to do that. We know so much about humans, their physiology, their anatomy, their diseases, how to treat them. We know so much about people compared to animals, which we relatively know very little about. So our knowledge base in veterinary medicine is actually quite broad and not as deep, whereas in human medicine, it's not nearly as broad, but it's way more detailed compared to vets. And I think that frankly makes sense. When it comes to human medicine, you can't just be one person and be an expert in every single thing that is medically relevant to a human body. There's just too much information. You can't be an expert in all of it. So I think that's why the system kind of funnels doctors into very defined, very specialized roles. I think it's kind of out of necessity. So yeah, overall, I would argue that veterinarians are doctors, but to say that they're the exact same or that they know more than human physicians, I think is a little bit of a reach. I have a lot of respect for human doctors. I give my brothers crap all the time, but I actually have a ton of respect for human physicians. So I don't know if I necessarily would say that we're smarter than they are, but we share a lot of similarities, and I think that's probably enough. Myth number 4, I became a vet because I don't want to deal with people. So for some reason, people think early on about vet med as somehow this means of escaping human interaction and just playing with animals all the time, and that's it. But if you stop and think about it, like, who do you think is bringing in these animals? Like, yes, there's some jobs like laboratory veterinarians and wildlife veterinarians where there is no owner per se. But like for the vast majority, like there's a person bringing in these pets to see you. So you have to interact with this person. You have to talk to the person about what's going on with the dog. You're not talking to the dog and getting some sort of interaction from them. You have to get a person to sign off on doing tests, giving treatment, letting you do things to them. And you have to explain this process and what you're seeing to them. So you're interacting with people basically all the time, nonstop every day. Never mind the fact that you at work will have tons of interaction with support staff like other doctors, technicians, receptionists, other veterinarians that are in another hospital, all sorts of different people that you're gonna have to learn how to interact with. So if you can't work with people, I mean, you can't be a vet. It's just plain and simple. All right, myth number 5. Myth number 5, veterinary medicine is a male-dominated field. So this could not be further from the truth. And when I was growing up, every vet I saw looked just like this guy from the movie Beethoven. I mean, this movie really nailed it. Like every vet I ever saw growing up, and my image of what a veterinarian was literally this guy for like years until I became a vet myself.
It's just gonna hurt you a lot more than it hurts me.
Anyways, nowadays I think it's kind of the opposite. In my graduating class of 2009 from Georgia, we had, I believe, 96 students, And of those, I believe 15 to 18 were men and the rest were women. And today, according to vetspanel.com, women make up 68% of the veterinary workforce. Now that doesn't mean our field is immune to the gender wage gap. In fact, the opposite is true, but perhaps that's a topic for another video at another time. But I think it's overall a good thing, and I've noticed that in every practice I've worked in, the majority of the doctors working there are women. So my experience would be in line with what the statistics say. So overall, I would see this as a win, but obviously there's a lot more things to do, a lot more issues to kind of tackle, and again, we can get into that in a future episode. All right, so I think that covers most of the myths that I encounter in veterinary medicine. I hope you enjoyed that quick rundown. If you don't mind, again, hitting the like and subscribe button and perhaps leaving a comment, let me know what video you'd like me to do in the future. That'd be great. I greatly appreciate you watching, guys. Thank you very much. Have a good one.